This is a Restless Music podcast, Shining Rails, Episode 4, by Keith Foster, from his memoir, My Early Days in the Railways.
In my firing days of the long ago, knowing the road was the chief attribute of a good fireman. I don't mean how to get from A to B, the rails take care of that, plus the signals and, of course, the driver. I mean knowing the vertical profile of the track between A and B. For instance, on level track it's obvious it will be light steaming, so we don't need a big fire. But we must know well in advance if a steep grade lies ahead, so that we can build up a good fire and have plenty of water in the boiler. The latter is necessary because when firing against the injector which is putting cold water into the boiler, steam pressure will fall on a steep climb, thus making life difficult for the fireman. The power output of a hand-fired locomotive is solely dependent on one thing, the muscles of the fireman. Knowing the road can ease this burden for an intelligent fireman, as well as making for more economical operation. A fireman doesn't just sling coal in, no matter how good his muscles. The golden rule is to fire light and often, and only in the bright spots. But although having said that, it's necessary to build up the back corners in the firebox. This is because of the forward slope of the grate and the heavy blast of the exhaust. The fire tends to get dragged forward. A heavy-handed driver can do the same, and if he doesn't adequately control a slip, half the fire may go up the funnel. When nearing the top of a grade, it's necessary to let the fire die down, so that when the driver shuts off when over the hill, there won't be black smoke everywhere and the engine blowing off madly, both of which waste fuel. Also, the water must be fairly high in the gauge glass, because if the level is too low, it may well disappear as the water goes towards the front of the boiler when it becomes the downhill end. If the fusible plug in the crown sheet of the firebox becomes uncovered, then the engine's disabled. In the 1930s, the fine for a fireman who let this happen was £2, 1 week's wages back then. There are 3 aspects of locomotive operation, 2 of which are human. The skill of the fireman, the skill of the driver, and the third, which at times can almost appear human, is the engine itself. Some engines, in particular the older saturated engines, were notoriously bad steamers at all times. You can't flog them, you must work with them just to get a fair result. The fireman and the driver must adapt to them. The engine won't adapt in any way, especially if it's in poor condition. A boiler washout may well be long overdue. Added to this, the quality of the coal, the atmospheric conditions, the load, and the exigencies of the timetable can add to the fireman's woes. Also, some days and nights, you can really have a battle. It's harder to know where you are when it's pitch dark and wet, no matter how well you think you may know the road. Back in the first year or so of World War II, the Victorian Railways appeared ill-prepared for the extra military traffic on top of the normal. There was also the wheat season, always the busiest time on the rails. I was working at Ballarat East Loco Depot as an engine cleaner, passed for firemen on steam locomotives. One afternoon I started at 3 p.m, just cleaning engines in the shed. After about an hour I was told to relieve someone on one of the yard pilot engines. Beaut, I thought, I'll just spend the evening until 11 p.m. trundling up and down shunting. After a couple of hours of this I was called to fire a goods train to Ararat, some 56 miles or 90k west of Ballarat. Beaut, I thought again, I'll have a nice short trip out on the road. I met up with the driver, we picked up the train and off we went, arriving at Ararat a couple of hours or so later. Before departing for home from Ararat about 9:30 p.m, We were told that when we crossed an opposing train about halfway to Ballarat, Beaufort Station I think it was, we'd probably be relieved and then travel home in the van. Ha ha ha. Its crew had been on longer than we had, and Control told us to change over and take their train to Ararat, so back we went. Instead of going home passenger as we'd hoped, we had to go over the pit, clean the fire, take coal and water, put the engine away, take another and run a goods train back to Ballarat. It was number 40 up being applied to trains travelling towards Melbourne. It was after midnight and we had long since run out of tucker, and once again we were told we would probably be relieved halfway to Ballarat. Ha 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 again, only louder. Eventually arriving in the Ballarat yard, we were told there was still no relief, and we were to take 40 up on towards Melbourne and change over with the crew of the paper train. This was a goods train which departed from Melbourne in the wee small hours. It also carried the morning papers. It usually arrived in Ballarat going on for 7 a.m. However, this day it was running late due to having to take siding to cross troop trains, and we had gone some 40 miles, 60k, to Parwan, 4 miles on the Melbourne side of Bacchus Marsh, before we met it. It was just cracking daylight as we changed over. The firemen had left me with a lousy fire. They must have been waiting there for quite some time because there wasn't much of it. It was a big loco, C1, usually a good steamer, but I had an unfair start as off we went towards home. I had little time to get the fire into shape before we tackled the dreaded Ingliston Bank, 11 miles over 17k of steep climb, starting on a horseshoe curve just out of Bacchus Marsh. On the straight steepest part we had a howling headwind, and in our train we had some 20 or more empty sheep wagons. Although these were essentially a double-storey open cage, they were well known to have a great wind resistance which one would not normally expect from their open construction. I learnt this the hard way. Battling it out all the way, at least we were headed for home. We waited somewhere or other to cross another couple of opposing trains and eventually arrived in the Ballarat yard about 8:30 a.m. We cut off, got the disc signal and took the road to the loco depot where we dumped our engine in the siding. Then we trudged wearily and hungrily to the office and signed off just before 9 a.m. During my shift I had travelled some 250 miles, that's 400k, to and fro on the Western Main Line and fired several classes of locomotive, ranging from the lowly 060Y class pilot through D1, D2, A1, A2 to the C-class heavy goods engine. D1s, D2s and A1s were mostly very poor steamers, especially when you had the poor quality state mine coal, which was most of the time, and they gave us many a battle. Fortunately this night I had been with one of our better drivers who managed each engine well. He helped me immensely with his knowledge of the road, telling me well in advance where we'd be steaming heavily or where he'd be shutting off to roll so that I could catch up on steam and boiler water. He also took the occasional turn on the shovel. Such men were the salt of the earth. When we finally finished, I'd been on the job for some 18 hours, including waits to cross other trains or to depart with our own. It seemed like a century. Luckily we could not be rostered on again until we'd had 11 hours off. When we had signed off, I got on my motorbike, rode home, ate, and then practically fell into my bed. Some 25 years later, that Beatles song said it all. It's been a hard day's night, and I've been working like a dog. Had I ever. Of whistles, the man in the van, those who maintained tracks wherever trains ran, the refresh girls, the shunters, station staff as well, porters on the platform who often rang a bell. The station master, who, in a manner most regal, surveys his domain with the eye of an eagle. Signalmen pulling levers clunk to make the road, or sounding train arrival in that curious bell code. Train examiners neath the cars adjusting the slack, a job with much crawling, and it's hard on your back. Those in the workshops and in loco sheds grimy, who kept the rolling stock running, be it old or new and shiny. You can hear the whistle blow, hear the whistle blow, hear the whistle blow. Crossing keepers, men and women too, who once tended the gates to let the trains through. The linesman whose job involved climbing a pole. The God we crews all served, the man at control. Apologies to others that I may have forgotten. It's been a long time, and my memory's rotten. But I'll never forget, deep down in my heart, that in my young days, I once was a part of that great railway family whose toil, hopes and fears kept Victoria's railways running 150 years. You can hear the whistle blow. Hear the whistle blow, 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 hear the whistle blow. Hear the whistle blow.
You have been listening to Shining Rails Episode 4, Hear the Whistle Blow, by Keith Foster, from his memoir, My Early Days in the Railways, written for the newsletter of the Steam Locomotive Society of Victoria. Keith Foster was a Victorian railwayman, musician, writer and community broadcaster. Narration and production by Roger Eilert. The song Hear the Whistle Blow was written by Keith Foster and Roger Eilert and performed by Roger Eilert and Penny Davies. This has been a Restless Music podcast.